The age of 14, my father passed away from having a stroke. It wasn't expected. It rocked my world and changed kind of my path forevermore. It was around that time I decided I wanted to go into medicine.
We see quite often, Hazel, people who have this real energy inside them that can only come from the kind of experience that you've had.
Strokes and heart disease are very much related to our lifestyles. Part of me thought I would learn loads about this and I would be able to prevent future strokes happening to other people's fathers.
Well, let's start talking then for our audience about practical things they could be doing when it comes to intervening.
We know that having 3 meals a day and a Mediterranean style diet and no caffeine and no alcohol is optimal. What's better than optimal is what you can consistently do, what's enjoyable and what's sustainable. One golden rule is don't skimp on sleep. Our thoughts and our memories are consolidated when we sleep, and you're only going to perform at your best if you're sleeping. Just work hard, but sleep harder.
Right, let's have a truth off on the Whoop bands then. How many hours sleep did you get last night?
I'm going to check.
Come on, get your phone out. Let's hear these stats. Well, Dr. Hazel Wallace, welcome to High Performance.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start with the traditional question, the way we begin all these interviews. What is your definition of high performance?
For me, it's about being able to do everything in your life that you love. So when I approach nutrition and movement, I'm always approaching it from the mindset that what is this going to allow me to do at my best ability in the future and allow me to live my life at the fullest, which is why I think it's like a really positive way to approach performance and mindset is how can I make the most of my life?
Okay, well, let's get straight into the good stuff then, because people will have come to this episode for it to have an impact on their lives. What is the thing that works for you and that you do, or the things that allow you to live your life to the fullest?
I think for me, it's the kind of making sure I'm getting my core fundamentals every day. So daily movement, making sure I'm fueling right. So 3 balanced meals a day, plus minus snacks, making sure I'm sleeping and getting good quality and quantity of sleep, and also looking after my mental health. So I see them as my 4 pillars of health. And although I don't get it perfect every time, and I don't expect people to get it perfect every time, I think if you're getting it 80% of the time, then that's good enough, because it's what we do most of the time that matters the most.
So could I ask you then, because they're fascinating areas, and I think for people listening to this, that they have obviously worked for you, Hazel, given that you are, in my definition, a polymath. So I'm interested in like how in your own background, if you'd share that with our listeners, because there's a couple of areas that you've specialized in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really goes all the way back to when I was a teenager. I grew up in Ireland, if people can't pick up from the accent, and at the age of 14, my father passed away from having a stroke, which happened quite quickly. It wasn't expected, and it rocked my world and changed kind of my path forevermore. And it was around that time I decided I wanted to go into medicine. And previously, I thought I would do something in accountancy or business. And I set us kind of on my path into medicine, moved to Wales, studied my degree. And strokes and heart disease are very much related to our lifestyle. So nutrition, how much activity we do, the stress we're under. And I guess part of me thought I would learn loads about this and I would be able to prevent future strokes happening to other people's fathers. And while we were paying a lot of lip service to things like nutrition is important for X, Y, and Z, we weren't learning the practical ways of applying it to a patient. So I started a blog 10 years ago now called The Food Medic, which is very basic on WordPress. And it gained a lot of interest because I was a medical student. I was talking about nutrition. I was trying to apply it to how it can enhance human health and prevent us getting to the point where we needed to see a doctor or go to the hospital. And so over those years, I qualified as a doctor, started working in London, working in a traditional kind of capacity in that I was seeing patients in A&E, in the acute department, cancer department, surgery. So I was doing all of those things, but running nutrition and my blog alongside it. And after a couple of years, I decided to actually go back and study a master's in clinical nutrition so that I could bring it all full circle. And COVID happened, and then I was a COVID doctor for the last 2 years. And during that time, I wrote my third book, which is called The Female Factor. And that's slightly different to nutrition in that I'm diving more into the sex differences when it comes to nutrition and movement and sleep and mood and those 4 pillars I discussed before. And now that's kind of my primary focus. So the Food Medic is quite a big platform. I've got 3 books, a podcast, big social media following. But the core kind of purpose is always getting out educational content and bridging that gap between mainstream medicine and lifestyle and nutrition. So that's me in a nutshell.
And it's clearly working. You know, the following and the impact is huge. And look, first of all, sorry for your loss. And I know like it's a few years ago, and I suppose people assume that over time things like that become easier, but I'm not sure it does really. I suppose we see quite often, Hazel, people who have this real burning desire or a passion or an energy inside them that can only come from the kind of experience that you've had. I'm just wondering, before we talk further about the work and the research and the lessons for our listeners, how doing this has helped you? Because on one hand, I think amazing that, you know, the loss of your father has allowed you to impact all these lives. But at the same time, the more you learn and the more you see and the more you understand, I'm sure there's an emotion in you thinking, I wish my dad had known this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I probably got into it in the beginning as a way to try to justify what happened or kind of reclaim something that I felt like I lost. And now that kind of I've been doing this for 10 years, I really feel like it's my vocation, which may sound a bit woo, but I do feel like this is the path that I'm supposed to go on. And although it was like an extremely harrowing experience, and I still find it really difficult to deal with, it puts purpose in the work that I do. And I think any message I get or emails from people who are like, tell me that, you know, they've read the article that I've shared or, you know, a post that I've put out or a podcast, and that's really helped improve their health or their parents' health or their child's health. And then I know that, you know, the work that I'm doing is worth it.
Well done. Amazing.
So Hazel, like, if there was one message that you would want people to know and to take away and to understand, given this, that I'm interested from a couple of demographics. One, for those of us outside the medical community, what you would want to convey. But equally, I'm interested in, given that you went down that route of going into medicine and then almost coming out of it and then pursuing it from a nutritional point of view, what would you want the medical community to know and understand based on your journey?
I think when I first got interested in nutrition, I felt deep frustration with the medical curriculum, because I just felt like, why aren't we talking about this? This is a huge gap in our research and knowledge. And if we're supposed to be helping people and prevent them from getting sick, then we can't just have a solution for when they do get sick. But having gone through the process of doing a master's in nutrition, which is a very different science to medicine, I realized that it's not possible or practical to wedge that into a medical school curriculum. And I don't think the solution is to like retrain all our doctors to be nutritionists, because we have dietitians and nutritionists. But I don't think we have that link. We don't have that easy link unless you're in hospital and you need dietetic advice when it comes to specific conditions. But that's quite niche. Like, you can't go to your GP and ask for nutritional support to see a dietitian. We just don't have that available. But what if we did? And what difference would that make to people? And how many more people's lives will we save or prevent them from going on medication or being debilitated from a condition? And so I just think like it's more about restructuring the healthcare system and putting an emphasis on education and movement and lifestyle and nutrition and all of these core things that we know make massive impacts to people's health, not just now, but in the future.
Because that reminds me of a conversation we had with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee on this podcast, where he spoke about a frustration that he had in the medical community, that he felt that a lot of the problems he was seeing at the cause element in his surgery could have been dealt with upstream by lifestyle changes rather than having to wait for medication or the pharmaceutical industry to catch up with it. So given that you sit in that fascinating sweet spot between medicine and nutrition, how much of the medical problems did you see when you were a doctor that could have been solved by better nutrition and diet?
Don't get me wrong. I would say that majority of the things that I was seeing, I was a hospital-based doctor, so not a general practitioner, which is in the community. Majority of things I was seeing were end-stage conditions where people did need intense medical plus or minus surgical intervention. But what I do think we are missing is in that community primary care setting. So when people first see their GP, that's when they first start having symptoms and things start going wrong. And that's our opportunity. That's our window of opportunity to prevent things from happening. But many of the conditions that people die of in the UK and also across the world, especially in the Western world now, are kind of chronic lifestyle related diseases that do have a component that is preventable. And what I mean by that is they're linked to things in our life that are modifiable, whether that's our diet, whether that is how much activity we do, the sleep that we're under, stress, smoking, alcohol. If we go back 20 years ago, we had other conditions that were infectious diseases that were an issue, like HIV. That's no longer an issue because we have medication to treat that. Now it's heart disease, cancer, stroke. These are the conditions that are at the top of the biggest killers in the world. And these are all the things that we can prevent if we get them at an early stage and if we intervene early.
Okay, well, let's start talking then for our audience about things, practical things they could be doing when it comes to intervening. I had a blood test a while ago, and I try and do everything I can to stay as fit as I can. And the age that they gave me from looking at my cells and all these things on this modern, new test, whether we should believe it or not, who knows, was not as low as I thought. And they said it was because of the amount of stress in my life. And I know when I'm stressed because I don't sleep well. So I'd like to talk about sleep, first of all. What should we all be thinking about nutritionally when it comes to improving our sleep, which, anyone that wears a Whoop band will know that is your recovery is the bedrock of everything.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting area of research that's just beginning to emerge. And I talk about this a lot in my new book. So I dived into it. And what I wanted to understand is what are the foods that can support sleep, and realize that is too much of a reductionist way of thinking. There are not foods that we can eat that's going to give us the best sleep or, green recovery on a Whoop band. But what we are understanding is that meal timing is really important when it comes to sleep quality and also sleep quantity, but also our kind of metabolism and our health markers. And this area of research is called chrononutrition, and it's about like matching up our nutrition with our internal clock, our circadian rhythm. And just like light and dark are cues for our circadian rhythm to tell us when it's time to go to sleep and wake up, when we eat is also a cue to our body when it's nighttime and when it's daytime. And so if you're eating late or into the biological night, so when it's dark outside, our body isn't primed to take on nutrients at that time. And that's not just going to disrupt your sleep. So you'll still be digesting when you're trying to go to sleep, and that's going to disrupt your sleep quality. It also can affect things like your glucose levels and the fats in your blood, which over time, if we're doing this consistently, can have huge knock-on effects. It can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and all these metabolic conditions in the long run. So I think what I'm saying is it's less about what individuals' foods are eating and more about the timing of meals when it comes to sleep and also overall health. And, there's a lot of advice coming out about time-restricted feeding or different types of fasting protocols. And I don't think everyone needs to do them. I also don't think they're suitable for everyone. But what I would say is try to have your main meals when it's light outside, and try not to be having a big meal after 6 p.m. into the night.
So I come at this then from a full-time working parent. So I get the kids from school about 4:30. Basically, I'm picking them up in the dark at the moment. So how do sort of busy working people, most people, let's be honest, are getting home from work 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. If it sounds like great advice, practically employing that in our lives is the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree. And it's something that we can't adhere to all the time. And if you're coming home late from work or you're out for late dinner, then you kind of have to accept that that's just what you're going to do. And I think thinking about our relationships is also really important for health. What I would say is if it's something that you're consistently doing because of your shift pattern or because of childcare or anything else like that, it might be wiser to have a larger meal at lunchtime and have a smaller meal then later in the evening when you're coming home. And thinking about foods that aren't going to keep you up at night. So going for foods that are not kind of high in sugar. So opting for complex carbohydrates that are high in fiber, like whole grains, legumes, pulses, lean sources of protein, and slightly lower in fat. And also when it comes to our meals, like I said, it's the most important thing is that you're getting your nutrients across the day, and it's what you're doing most of the time. So if this is something that happens once in a blue moon, then that's fine. But if it's happening consistently, then just try to shift your meal times or your bigger meals earlier in the day.
And what do you do for someone like me and my wife who will eat with the kids about 5:30, 6 o'clock, put them to bed, all good, sit on the sofa, and then I see the crisps about 9 p.m. She sees the Cadbury's chocolate fingers about 9:05, and at 10 o'clock we're going to bed going, why did I do that? Is that because we're not consuming enough calories during the day and we're a bit deficient, or is it that it's a habit we've got into? Because listen, we all like to pretend we're high performance. We've all got our flaws, and people listening to this may well do the same. What do you think?
I think it could be a combination of both. One of the reasons that people tend to snack late at night is because it's habit, because of boredom, and you're watching TV and you tend to associate watching TV with having snacks. But also because of the nutrients that you're having across the day. So not just in your last meal, it might be that in that day, you didn't actually consume enough calories or enough nutrient dense meals. And so your body later in the day is like, I need to catch up. So going to bed hungry can also disrupt your sleep. So we don't want to do that either. But I would advise focusing on your meals in the day and making sure you're making them as nutrient dense, so that they're supporting you, and that later in the day, you're not having that dip in blood sugar and you're not requiring crisps or chocolate to keep you going. But it can be difficult to break a habit. I think if you are doing it with someone like your wife and you both agree that you're going to break this habit, or you're going to maybe have something like just closely after your last meal, so it's not later into the evening, and so you still get something sweet, but you're not disrupting your sleep and you're not affecting your health later in the night.
Thank you.
So can I go after one of the other pillars then, Hazel, that I'm intrigued about? Because focus is something that I need help with, in our increasingly busy world. The ability just to be able to zero in and go deep with focus is something I often struggle with. And I'm intrigued as to what advice you can offer us about how we can get better at that.
Yeah, I would love to know the secret as well. Our focus and attention span is reducing significantly because we are harder, we require more things to keep us captivated. In that, if you go onto social media now, it's super engaging because it's fast, it's changing, there's like lots of different texts, there's lots of sounds, and to sit down and read a book or read a paper or read an email requires a lot of attention now. And the only way that you can enhance that is by trying to eliminate as many distractions around you as possible. And so that means putting your phone on airplane mode, closing all non-essential tabs, making sure that you're in an environment that is conducive to working. So you're not like sitting on the sofa or in a space that doesn't feel like working for you. Other things that can be helpful is having cues that tell you and your mind that you're going into a deep work mode. And for me, that's like making sure that I've got a hot drink and I've got a work playlist. So every time I put that playlist on, I know I'm in deep work. I also like using like focus timers for up to 50 minutes and then having a 10-minute break in between, because we know that, you know, you cannot sustain good quality attention for 2 hours, but we beat ourselves up about it if we don't. So try to work in those focused blocks, and that can enhance the quality of the work that you're doing, because we often confuse productivity and efficiency. So what we want to do is we want to be efficient in our work, because we can be productive but not efficient.
So, I mean, they're fascinating hints to adopt. I'm interested as well, though, that I often notice that when I do deep work where I really focus, and I've read around the glucose that it requires your brain to be able to think about thinking in many ways, I'll often reach for like a sugary drink afterwards. I noticed. So have you got any sort of nutritional advice about how we can structure our lives to be able to do that deeper work for longer?
Yeah, absolutely. So glucose or carbohydrates are our main source of fuel, so our body's main preferred source of fuel, and also our brain. So we require to focus. But obviously there's different types of carbohydrates. We have more simple carbohydrates, which include sugars, and then complex carbohydrates, which are things like fiber and starches. And although we could all do with reducing the amount of free sugars in our diet, so the sugars that we get from like cakes and sweets and things like that, complex carbohydrates are really good for you when it comes to health. And when it comes to focusing and maintaining those stable glucose levels, having foods like whole grains and pulses like chickpeas and beans and wholemeal pastas and breads are all really good sources, and they'll help stabilize those blood sugar levels, so you're not getting dips and troughs in those levels, which kind of leave us feeling a little bit hungry or feeling like we're losing concentration. Because if our body is fueled appropriately, that's one less thing for our brain to think about, and so it's able to focus on the work. But if your tummy is grumbling or your blood sugar levels are low, your body's going to be telling you, hey, we need to get a snack, so you need to stop reading that. So they're just some tips to bear in mind. A couple of other things to help stabilize blood sugars would be adding protein and fats to your meal. So not just having carbs on their own, but it might be if you are having, say, a slice of wholemeal toast, you add some peanut butter, which has healthy fats and protein in it. Or if you're making yourself like some lunch, you could have like brown rice, chicken and veggies, for example, or a wholemeal wrap, adding some like tuna and chickpeas and some veggies. And so they're just some kind of ways that you can have a healthy, balanced meal that will stabilize your blood sugar and keep you fueled for whatever you're doing. Things like caffeine can also be really helpful if you use it wisely, because we know that it can enhance concentration and focus, but up to a limit, because some people are quite caffeine sensitive and they can get really anxious if they have too much in the day. So it's really quite individual.
So tell us more about that, if you will, Hazel, because I know that you've spoken a lot on Instagram and in your brilliant books around our caffeine addiction in many ways. Tell us like where that sweet spot is that you believe it can help, and then where it can go over the top. Yeah.
So caffeine is probably one of the most well-researched drugs in sports performance. It can massively enhance not just mental performance, but also kind of physical performance, which is why you get it in all pre-workouts, and you can get it in kind of energy drinks as well. And the evidence for that is really strong. But the recommended amount that we have per day, or the limit that we should have, is 400 milligrams. And you can get about 200 milligrams in any sports drink or any pre-workout. So it's pretty easy to knock that up and go above that. And beyond those levels, people tend to feel irritable. They lose concentration, they lose focus. You can get gut issues as a result of it. And also it will affect your sleep. So the half time of caffeine, which is the time it takes to metabolize half of it, is very variable from person to person because it's based on our genetics. And for some people, it can be up to 10 hours. And so that caffeine that you're having at midday could be disrupting your sleep.
Brilliant.
It's really interesting because I would never have thought that too much coffee reduces the ability to focus and concentrate. I mean, I know that I'm a coffee addict, but I think about my life, right, Hazel? It's either long days where I'm recording 4 or 5 podcast episodes, long days where I'm traveling, or days with lots of sort of little injections of excitement where I'm doing live TV. So I actually probably self-medicate with coffee. If I've got a long journey, I'll drink it. If I'm doing a podcast, a bunch of them, I'll probably have a coffee before each record, maybe 3 or 4 in a day. And certainly on a day of live telly, man, I can do 5 or 6 coffees. And if there are people listening to this thinking, yeah, that rings a bell, what should I, or what could I be doing to kind of break this cycle that I think I'm stuck in?
I would question whether you really need it, whether the caffeine's actually effective at that point. Because I was definitely an 8-cup a day person when I was in medical school, and I don't really feel like it actually was effective up to a certain point, and was probably just causing issues down the line. What I would say is, when you are feeling like you need caffeine later in the day, kind of check in with yourself and see, is it because I'm hungry? Have I eaten a balanced meal today? Is that what I need? Do I need a glass of water instead? Do I need to go outside? Do I need to do some breath work? Because all those things can also give you energy. Breath work and a cup of coffee can actually be quite similar if you do it correctly. And so there are other things that can help you collect yourself and get you energy that don't require having a cup of coffee. And again, similar to the snacking story that you told us, sometimes it's just habitual. When we feel like we're a little bit stressed or we're losing energy because it's 5 p.m. in the day, it's easy to think that coffee is going to be the answer, and it's not always the answer.
And is there a hard stop in your mind when, like, you just don't drink coffee after this time?
I tend to recommend not after midday, but I would be lying if I said that I stuck to that every time.
Come on, we're all flawed. We can all sit here and say, and actually, I think there's just worth picking up on that briefly. Like, there'll be people listening to this, and sometimes they'll feel like they're either failures or they're inferior because they hear all this amazing advice and feel they get it wrong all the time. Like, let's be clear, right, Hazel? You don't get it right 24 hours a day, okay?
No. And I really try to talk about that on my Instagram. When it comes to like movement and nutrition and things like that, I think we always talk about, and I'm guilty of it, I talk about what's optimal for human performance. But what's better than optimal is what you can consistently do, what's enjoyable, and what's sustainable. And they're more important than what you're doing than reaching for optimal, because we know that 8 hours of sleep per night in a dark room with no noise is optimal. We know that having 3 meals a day and a Mediterranean style diet and no caffeine and no alcohol is optimal. But if you do all of those things and it's affecting your mental health, or it means you can't live your life and your relationships are breaking down and your social life's breaking down, then that's not healthy.
Have you got your Whoop band on at the moment?
Yes, always.
Right. Let's have a truth off on the Whoop bands then. How many hours sleep did you get last night? Come on, get your phone out. Let's hear these stats.
I got 7 hours, 55 minutes of sleep, and 3 hours were restorative.
Okay. And what does that make your recovery?
I actually only had yellow recovery, but I think that's because I did a lot of activity yesterday and I probably didn't recover very well.
So funny, because when you're like, I only had yellow recovery. For me, when I get a yellow recovery, I'm like, woo!
That's good.
Yellow recovery. So for people that are listening to this conversation, if you've got the way that Whoop works is it doesn't just tell you what you've done, it tells you what you need to do by using some different measurements to give you a recovery score. So mine's 45% my recovery score. What's yours today?
I think mine was 55.
And what's your HRV?
Quite low today, 53. But it's very variable from person to person, so we shouldn't compare.
True. My HRV is 35. My recovery is 45%. Would you mind just, for those listening that are thinking, what are they talking about? Would you mind sharing what HRV is? Because it's a sort of crucial way of measuring people on Whoop, isn't it?
Yeah, so HRV is heart rate variability, and it's different to your resting heart rate, which Whoop also take into account when they calculate your recovery scores. And your recovery score is based on HRV, so heart rate variability, resting heart rate, and also the strain that you did the day before. So how much kind of cardiovascular strain you put your body under, and how much sleep you got, and then it calculates this recovery score that you get the next day. And it's green, yellow, and then red is not very good. And so heart rate variability is basically the differences in between each heartbeat. And so the higher the number, the better, which is different to resting heart rate. So when it comes to health, we want low resting heart rate because that means that we're working efficiently. But we want high HRV or heart rate variability because that means our body is better able to switch between those parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So it's more adaptable. And so what people will see is as their recovery increases, the heart rate variability will increase. So it's just another metric of recovery.
And I know we shouldn't compare, but on a good day, mine's about 55. And one of my best friends is a professional footballer and he wears a Whoop band. I said to him, "What's your HRV?" He said, "It's quite low today, 147. I was like, okay.
Yeah, I know it's the same with loads of my friends where they'll be in the hundreds all the time and they'll still get red recovery. Whereas I think my highest would be like maybe 80. The reason why it's so useful is so you know what your trends are. And so it's a really good snapshot for you to get better learnings for your body. And one of the things I love about that Whoop have just also included is a menstrual cycle tracker. So for women who use Whoop, when it's calculating your recovery, it also takes into account where you are in your menstrual cycle because your hormones also influence your recovery. I think that's fantastic.
And you've done a lot of work recently, haven't you, about the differences between men and women when it comes to nutrition and the way that we should operate. What are the biggest learnings that you've discovered that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, the biggest reason why I wrote the book, The Female Factor, is because historically most of the medical research we have is based on a 70-kilo male body. And then we just have extrapolated it to make the assumption that women are just smaller men and that, everything is the same. And the reason that women have been excluded from clinical trials for years is because we have fluctuating hormones, which can be a nuisance for researchers because then they have to account for them. There's also the risk of pregnancy. And so for ethical reasons, they've excluded women. And women tend to be primary caregivers, not all the time now, but previously. And so getting them recruited into trials was a bit more tricky. And so basically for years and years, we've just never included women. And while that's changing, it only started to change about 10 years ago. And by the time research happens to that changing how we practice in health and healthcare, it takes many years. And so a lot of the advice that we use, a lot of the treatment protocols and diagnostic tests are still based on men. And that's not just when it comes to medicine, but also when it comes to the advice that we give out about nutrition, about movement, about sleep, about differences in mood. And so I wrote the book to try really untangle that and give really tangible advice for women how they should be eating across their menstrual cycle or when they're going through the menopause, and how we're stronger at certain parts of our cycle, how our mood's better, why we have mood changes at certain points, and just really try to understand these things, because I think for women, it can often feel like it's part and parcel of being a woman. You have to accept that sometimes you will feel really crappy, when actually I think it's really empowering to understand these things and make changes with your nutrition and sleep and looking after your mental health and offsetting those terrible symptoms that we hear about.
I also think it's empowering for partners and husbands of women to understand as well, isn't it? So the conversation about mood swings and your changes in moods through your menstrual cycle, what is the scientific reason for that? Because even my own wife says, I don't know why I feel like this, but I do.
Yeah. So most women will report, just in that premenstrual phase, so PMS, that they will get mood changes, and that can be like mood swings, feeling tearful, irritable. There's many, many symptoms. Actually, there's up to 150 different PMS symptoms that women report. And 90% of women do experience them. So they're a very real thing. But we don't really understand why, because if you take a woman who has PMS and a woman who doesn't have PMS or report mood changes, they have the same levels of hormones. So it's not the level of hormones, but it seems to be that the women who experience it are more sensitive to that drop in hormones that occurs just when you're going into menstruation. And we're trying to really understand the reasons why. We also know at that part of the cycle that there's a change to your stress response, so how we respond to stress, and that's based on like the hormones in your body, like adrenaline and cortisol, and how they link up with estrogen and progesterone. So it's kind of the same narrative in that we definitely need more research, and only new research is coming out now. But it's a very real thing, and there are things that women can do that can offset this to a degree. And there's lots of nutrition strategies, like increasing magnesium intake in that part of the cycle, or taking magnesium supplements. Calcium and vitamin D supplements have been shown to be really effective as well. Sleep is something that you should really prioritize during that time. But one study that was really interesting, and I think this will be interesting for people who are partners, is that the biggest predictor of mood changes is not hormones when it comes to PMS, it's social support and the relationships that you're in. So actually, if women who feel supported in their relationships are less likely to experience PMS symptoms. So if your partner is, going through that, just make sure she feels really supported, maybe take the bins out and offer to cook. And that will help her feel a bit more supported and a bit more able to cope with these kind of swings in hormones.
So can you give us like some advice then on, beyond the practical stuff that you just said there about taking the bins and cooking the tea, what other elements can we do to support women going through this based on this recent research that you've been involved in, Hazel?
Having an open dialogue, so feeling comfortable enough to talk about it. And I still think that talking about menstrual health, especially, even me speaking to women can sometimes feel very confronting for women. So me speaking to a group of men can feel very confronting. And I think there's often, every relationship's different, but some men just don't really want to know about that. And sometimes women don't want to share, but you can always just kind of open up the dialogue by, if you're having a difficult time, just let me know, and ask them, what can I do to support you during this time? That will be kind of the best piece of advice. And when it comes to practical things, like in that week before the period, just really hone in on all those things those core fundamental pillars, getting the right nutrition, avoiding alcohol, because that can really, really influence anxiety and menstrual symptoms around that time. Optimizing sleep. In that part of the cycle, sleep tends to be worse because our temperature is slightly higher. Movement has been shown to help ease PMS symptoms and symptoms of anxiety and depression. So while women tend to not feel like moving around that time, encouraging gentle movement, whether it's yoga or going for walks, or if they feel up for it, doing a strength session. And they would kind of be my primary pieces of advice when it comes to that.
And what about women who suffer with quite a lot of pain around this time? I'm forever running downstairs at 10 p.m. to get a hot water bottle or make sure there's paracetamol by the bed. Is there something nutritionally that we should be looking to do at that point?
Yeah. So there is good advice when it comes to PMS. And the best thing is, again, following a Mediterranean style diet, which is very colorful, full of whole grains, oily fish, those kind of foods, because that's anti-inflammatory and can help dampen that inflammatory response. And menstruation in and of itself is an inflammatory response. So we want to dampen that down, and that will reduce cramping and pain around that time. But also, like I mentioned, including magnesium supplements can be helpful, and calcium-rich foods, or including calcium supplements. Vitamin D is really important. In the UK and Ireland, we get no vitamin D during autumn and winter. So definitely supplement with that daily, and that is for men and women should be doing that anyway. And other things like soya products. So soya foods are really interesting because they have a type of plant chemical called phytoestrogens, which basically translates to plant estrogen. And they're not the same as estrogen, but they mimic it in the body in that they bond to the same receptors. And research shows that that may help ease PMS symptoms. So you can find soya in soy milk and soy yogurts, but also tofu and other products that use it, like tempeh. And so that's just kind of some nutritional tips for including it there. It's really interesting because women tend to report more cravings during that time. And what we see is also their metabolism. So the amount of energy they burn at rest increases as well. So you will feel more hungry. And the best thing to do then is similar to what we were talking about when it comes to focus and our energy dips. Include lots of whole grains and fibrous foods, and try not to rely on caffeine and sugar to get you through.
Is this advice, when you for what you're describing here, Hazel, is it replicable for women going through the menopause?
It's slightly different. And in the book, in the nutrition chapter, I talk you through all the way from the menstrual cycle to the menopause.
Okay.
So when it comes to the menopause, because we lose estrogen is so important for brain health, heart health, bone health. We have receptors all over our body for estrogen. And so if we lose that, we lose all the health promoting benefits of it. And so after the menopause, we see this huge increase in heart disease, increase in osteoporosis, increase in dementia. In order to kind of help reduce those risks, nutrition is absolutely key. And so you want to be focusing on foods that are heart healthy, and foods that support brain health, and foods that support bone health. But also there's some evidence that, not all women will experience really terrible menopausal symptoms like hot flushes. But for women who do, there are some nutritional strategies, again, including soy-based foods because they mimic estrogen to a degree, not having spicy or fatty foods because that will increase hot flashes, and just ensuring that you're having like a really well-rounded Mediterranean style diet. And that type of diet comes up time and time again, but regardless of whether you're a man or a woman or whatever age group, if you're focusing your diet around that, you're 80% of the way there, and then the rest of it's just tweaking.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And can I ask you from a male perspective as well? I mean, we have a lot of men that listen to this podcast. We have a lot of young men listening to this podcast, and they probably think life's easy because they can eat what they want. They go to the gym once a week, and the six pack is great, and the guns are looking nice. And when you get to the age of myself and Damien, whatever we do, it seems that, getting rid of belly fat and things is a challenge. So amazing advice for women who are either approaching the menopause, going through the menopause. What about as men like Damien and I hit their 40s? What should we as older guys be looking to do?
Yeah, well, with age, your metabolism will slow down, unfortunately.
Oh, I've noticed. Don't worry. That's crystal clear.
And so that means that, your energy needs might be a little bit lower, so less calorie needs. But at that point in time, you want to start thinking about your heart health, your brain health, your long-term health. And I feel like a lot of people think that that's something they need to think about when they're 75, when really we should be thinking about it when we're 20. In fact, I think over 50% of people or 60% of people over the age of 35 in the UK, don't quote me on that stat, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, have high blood cholesterol levels. And they don't know it because you wouldn't have any symptoms if you've got high cholesterol levels, but that is a huge risk factor for heart disease and stroke in the future. Right. So my message is, regardless of whether you're in your 30s or your 40s, you need to be thinking about kind of the foods that are going to support your heart and your brain for long-term health. And it's not good enough to just start when you get, you go to the doctor and they're like, your blood pressure's high, your cholesterol's high, because at that point, it's not too late, but it's harder to reverse. But if you never get there, then it's never going to be an issue. And so what's good for your heart is good for your brain. And again, that's going to be your really colorful fruits and vegetables, your whole grains, your lean sources of protein, your olive oil. I think for a lot of active men who go to the gym, their priority are their macronutrients. So getting enough protein, having kind of X amount of carbs, and getting small amounts of fat. And they're never thinking about their micronutrients. They're not thinking about their vitamins and minerals. They're probably not hitting their 5 a day. And so I would start thinking about that. I would start getting more colorful fruits and vegetables into your diet, get more plant-based foods in there. Think about your foods beyond protein, because protein's important, but so is everything else.
You see, I'm slipping into this. So a good example, I'll tell you about today, right? I've not eaten yet today because I've never really liked breakfast, but I've been to the gym and I've done a weight session and I've had a protein shake. And my plan after this is a ham and cheese omelette. And then I will probably have dinner with the kids, maybe I'll try and eat vegetables and whole wheat pasta and stuff this evening. But until then, the only real thing that's past my lips is water, coffee and some eggs and a protein shake. What do you think when I say that?
I think that it's very unlikely that you're going to get 5 portions of fruit and veg in your dinner. And also, we need to think about what you're getting across the day and not just in your main meal in the night time. So you could make really simple tweaks. If you really don't want to consume food in the morning, you could add a greens shake, like a greens powder, like Athletic Greens or something similar, alongside your coffee or with your protein shake, or add it in there. Or
AG1 is the first thing I take every day, but I kind of worry that my mum would tell me this, Jacob, but that's not real food, or am I misguided there?
No, you're right in that I am always food first and supplements second. But sometimes I'm working with people who are just adamant, I'm not going to eat in the morning. And so we have to sometimes lean into convenience, like this kind of example. But what you could do instead is also, when you're making your protein shake, you could just whack it into a NutriBullet with a handful of spinach and some frozen berries. And that's not really adding in like a huge amount of food. So you're not going to feel full or really satiated, but you're going to get in at least 2 portions of fruit and veg and more fiber.
And what does that do for us, the fruit and veg?
Up to beyond 5 portions of fruit and veg today has been linked to longer longevity. And actually a recent study, about 2018, came out to say actually 10 portions is what we should be aiming for a day. But
10.
That's just not 10. That's just not practical for most people, unless you're vegan. And so my advice is, 5 plus if you can. But what's more important is that you're getting a variety of different fruits and vegetables, because all the different colors, all the different types of fruits and veg, and all the different plant-based foods include a different spectrum of nutrients. And that's where we get our antioxidants, because you're not getting them from your protein sources. You're getting your colorful kind of water-based vitamins. You're getting your vitamins and minerals from those fruits and vegetables. They're also a great source of fiber. And what we're starting to learn now is, we know already that in the UK, we consume maybe about half of the amount of fiber we should. And I think people, when they think about fiber, I think it's just for having regular bowel motions. And it does that, but that's not the only thing it does. It really helps support our gut microbiome. So all those gut bugs that we have, which not only supports our gut health, that has far-reaching effects to our brain health, our immune system, our heart health. And so it's in your best interest to be getting enough fiber and enough colorful fruits and veg into your diet. But going back to your kind of daily example meal, if it's convenient for you to have a ham and cheese omelette, I still think that's like a healthy option. But what I would say is, can you add a side of greens? Could you fold in some spinach? Could you add some tender stem broccoli on the side, or slice in some tomatoes? You can do it.
It's happening now.
I think always just look down at your plate and be like, do I have any fruit and veg on my plate? And if you don't, then go find some. And like sometimes it doesn't, it doesn't have to make sense. Yesterday, my boyfriend was laughing at me, but I had scrambled eggs and a bagel, and then I had watermelon on my plate, and he thought that was extremely weird. But I knew I had no veg, and I wanted to get in some fruit and veg because I was never going to hit what I needed across the day.
One of our rules in our house is multicolored plates of food. Is there truth in the fact that all the colors, all the vitamins and minerals?
Yeah. So I mean, you can still hit all the different fruits and vegetables or different colors, and it's not to say that will make your diet optimal, but it's a good way to start because all those different colors are there because of the different antioxidants that are in them, the different types of plant chemicals. And, we know that really like dark colored, like fruits and vegetables like aubergines and blueberries and blackberries are really good for your brain health, for example. Leafy greens as well, and kind of green colored foods tend to be rich in vitamin K, which is also really important for your brain health, but also your bone health. And so all these different colored fruits and veg have their own kind of specific properties that they help benefit us. Like we say, eat carrots for your eyes. It's not because of carrots, it's because of the different nutrients in it. But you can find that in butternut squash as well. So think about variety. And if you're the type of person that's consistently having the same vegetables each day, next week, pick up a new vegetable when you go to the supermarket, even if it's just one new vegetable. If you don't know how to cook it, go onto YouTube, and I'm sure there'll be some kind of video to show you.
Hazel, Jake and I recently met a guy who's got a book out next year around the dangers of processed food. And he used this great line where he said that we all live in a swamp in terms of processed food and the damage it's doing to us. And that we often try and find sort of quick fixes to lift ourselves out of the swamp. And I'm interested in asking you some of like the kind of hacks that have crept into popular culture and get your view on them. So can I ask you around like the advice that people have around drinking 8 glasses of water a day to be helpful? What's your view on that? Is that a fact or is it a myth?
It's really funny because we've all heard this recommendation, and even if you read like health pamphlets or like doctor pamphlets, it will say drink 8 glasses of water a day, but there's no evidence to say that that's optimal. Like it's not based on any research studies. Right. It's just a random recommendation. It's not a bad recommendation because I think for most people that's about enough. But for some people, it's not enough. And for some people, it could be too much, like for very small people, because it's based on our body weight in terms of our hydration needs. But practically speaking, we're not all weighing ourselves and figuring out how much water we need per day. So I would say if you can aim for that, that's a kind of a good aim, but 6 to 8 is probably a good kind of middle of the road figure. And also things like coffee and tea, although not optimal, also contribute towards your fluid intake.
Great. Okay. So another one then. What about avoiding sugars completely?
Yeah, I'm not a big believer in this. I think if you restrict anything from your diet, that is the biggest indicator of someone binging. And then you fall into that binge restrict cycle. Also, I said earlier in the podcast, we should in general try to reduce the amount of free sugars in our diet. And when I say free sugars, I mean sugars that are added to the food by the cook or the consumer. So that would be things like cakes or jams and a table sugar and things like that. It doesn't include sugars in milk or fruit. So free sugars we should reduce because we eat lots of it. But there's no evidence to say that a small amount of it is going to be detrimental to your health. And if a small amount of it is going to add pleasure and satisfaction and allow you to have a balanced diet, then I think it's a healthier approach than cutting it out completely. It's also almost impossible to avoid sugar.
Okay. And then the last myth I'm interested in is, or fact or fiction, is intermittent fasting will help me lose weight.
No, it's just a myth. While you can lose weight whilst doing fasting, it's basically down to a calorie deficit. And there's no research to say that it's any better than a standard diet where you eat and don't fast and still have the same amount of calories. So when we compare them like for like, there's no difference in terms of weight loss.
Brilliant.
Can I just ask you about that quickly? Because I used an app for a while about fasting, and it used to show me the different stages my body's going into as I wasn't eating. And at one point, I managed to do a 24-hour fast, and I know they can be quite common or quite popular anyway. Would you ever recommend that for people, or kind of what they call a water fast, where they drink but don't eat? But also, the app was telling me things that my body was doing, like it spoke about atrophy, right, where it said you're now actively burning fat cells in your body. Like, was that all just nonsense? And it was kind of finding ways to gamify the experience and promote not eating. Because I think we have to be very careful on this subject, don't we? You know, I have a 9-year-old daughter who already looks in the mirror and talks about her weight and things. And, you know, I want to be really careful the way we talk about this.
Yeah, I think intermittent fasting, especially beyond 12 hours, or beyond 15 hours, I'll just be a bit more flexible with it, can be actually quite detrimental for people. I definitely don't recommend water fasts, and I know that some people do them up to 5 days, which can be really dangerous.
Wow.
The reasons I don't recommend it is because it reduces your likelihood of getting enough nutrients and calories in the day. It does increase, based on the research, your risk of disordered eating and a poor relationship with food. And also for especially women, it can disrupt your hormones, so it can disrupt your menstrual cycles. It can do the same to men, so it can affect your testosterone levels if you're doing long periods of fasting, because we need enough energy available to do all of the processes in our body, not just breathing and our heart pumping, but also our hormones and reproducing. And so I don't think the evidence is there to say extended fasts are beneficial for human health. Most of the studies are done on mice. We know that there's like fasting coming out. Again, when I say fasting, I'm talking more about time restricted feeding in this context, which means having smaller eating windows around your sleeping patterns. That area of research is quite interesting, but it's not extreme. It's fasting for 12 to 15 hours, not fasting for 24 to 5 days. And so it's something that I don't ever recommend. And even when it comes to fasted training in the morning, I know that that's really popular amongst people. There's no benefits to say it's going to enhance performance, and actually it can be detrimental to performance. So there's a lot of this kind of like, I guess I'm always asked about fasting, and context matters. And so it depends what people are doing it for. And I'm not completely against it, but I'm not for it for everyone.
So before we hit our quick fire questions to wrap up what's been a fascinating conversation, with all those great bits of advice about things that we shouldn't be doing, how would you like to leave it with people for what we should do, you know, in terms of balance and just the sort of sensible decisions, how you'd like people to view their day through a nutritional lens?
I would say, for me, it's about focusing on getting your 3 balanced meals per day. And I think that's really unsexy advice because it's what we've been told from when we were in school. But actually, that's the biggest predictor of being able to get the nutrients that you have and enough calories, and not over consuming or binging in the nighttime by skipping meals. I think if you're the type of person who doesn't like to have breakfast, that's fine. But just make sure that you're getting your 2 well-rounded meals and maybe another snack in the day. The other thing which I kind of banged on around the fiber conversation is increase the amount of plant-based foods in your diet, not just fruits and vegetables, but plant-based foods. So that's anything from like whole grain cereals, breads and pastas, beans and pulses, because they're really rich in fiber. They also are rich in antioxidants. And we know that people who consume up to 30 different plant-based foods per week have the best gut microbiomes and have the healthiest outcomes. And so that may sound like a huge amount, like I'll never get to 30 in a week, but it also includes things like herbs and spices, tinned tomatoes, things that you're doing anyway that you're probably not aware of. But it can be a good kind of challenge to start ticking them off and seeing how you're getting on in a week, and maybe doing a little audit and then improving on that. And my third one would be, although I did say that, you know, a lot of gym-based people focus on just getting enough protein, most everyday people kind of gen pop don't get enough protein, or they don't prioritize it at regular intervals across the day. They'll just kind of have it at a big, in a big meal in the nighttime. So try to have regular boluses of protein throughout the day, lean sources. And the reason that's important is not just for kind of building strong muscles, it's also really important for our bones. 50% of our bones are made of protein. But also our immune health and our hormonal health as well. So make sure you're getting your protein in. And that would be kind of my 3 top tips.
Nice.
I love them. I love the idea of almost gamifying and coming up with trying to hit a target, because that appeals to me.
And also, can I just say, by the way, well done for basically saying 3 meals a day, because I think you exist, particularly Hazel, in a world where people are constantly thinking, right, how can I stand out? Maybe I should tell people to do detoxes or take CBD oil or just eat avocados for 24 hours a day or go on a keto diet. And actually, sometimes the least sexy advice can be the most practical, right?
Yeah. And I've definitely been guilty in the beginning to try to think of the most exciting things to do. And as I've gone along, I've just simplified, reduced, and also thinking about what's the most practical thing. And it's always those low-hanging fruit. It's never the supplements or the kind of quick fixes. That's never going to work. And sometimes there's things that can be the cherry on top of the cake. But if we can get the cake right, then we're doing quite well.
Wow. Like going back to your initial answer about the origins of this drive to go and explore this area and the sad story about your father, I just think it's really quite moving to hear this really practical advice. As a father myself, it's really powerful. So thank you for sharing it and making it so clear and candid for us.
Thank you.
And we always finish our conversations with a few quick fire questions. The first of which, and you can take this either from a nutritional perspective or just from a life perspective, the 3 non-negotiables that you and the people around you need to buy into.
3 non-negotiables. Phone-free hour in the morning, which I've adopted and lost and readopted. That's really important for me, for my mental health. Daily movement. And when I say movement, I don't just mean structured exercise. It can be any form of movement. So dancing or going for a walk or playing golf or tennis, anything. And the 3rd non-negotiable is sleep. And I guess I've not included nutrition in that, but for me, sleep is probably the lowest hanging fruit that has the biggest impact on how I feel. And I know that if I can consistently get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, then I'm always doing my body a service and I'm doing my future health a service.
If there was one piece of advice that you could give to a teenage Hazel just starting out, what would that be?
I think when it comes to your health, it's very easy, especially if you are a girl, to think that you need to make yourself smaller. But that's not true. And you should focus on fueling yourself for all the things that you love and being able to kind of go to school, go to studies, go out and enjoy yourself. I think that will be the message I'd tell my younger self.
Lovely. Very nice. What is your biggest strength? What is your greatest weakness?
Oh, this is so hard. Biggest strength is I'm very driven and very motivated. So if I get an idea in my head, I will absolutely follow it through to the end, even to my detriment. I think my biggest weakness is I am my biggest critic, and I often struggle with doubt and imposter syndrome, and sometimes need to give myself a bit of a shake in the talking to.
We recently interviewed a guest that had a great line that he said, "How you do anything is how you do everything." What's the one thing that you do that would give us a clue into the person you are?
I think my my kind of mantra around daily movement, and that gives a good idea of how I kind of approach health in my life, because I feel like it's something that is massively underestimated when it comes to our mental health. And for me, I was diagnosed with anxiety early in my 20s. And it's one of the things that I feel like if I do it, I'm ticking off something on my list for my health. And it makes me feel like I'm better able to kind of tackle challenges. I feel more productive. I feel more capable.
It's really good. And finally, this is the kind of last message, I guess, for the people that are listening to this. Your one golden rule for them to live a high performance life.
One golden rule is don't skimp on sleep. When it comes to high pressure deadlines, it's very easy to think that we need to not sleep and work harder, when actually our thoughts and our memories are consolidated when we sleep. So you're only going to remember those things if you're getting adequate sleep, and you're only going to perform at your best if you're sleeping. So just work hard, but sleep harder.
I love that. Work hard, but sleep harder. Thank you so much for your time. Hazel, tell me, what was your dad's name?
Kevin.
Kevin would be so proud of not just what you've gone on to do, but the lives that you've impacted. And, it's one of the sort of sad truths, I guess, of the world in which we live, that it has to sometimes take a trauma to create a triumph. And there's no doubt that, you have impacted so many because of what you went through. So wherever Kevin is and whatever he's up to, let's hope he's getting his sleep, eating well, looking after himself. And
Thank you.
One day you'll hopefully get the chance to check in on all that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, no worries.
Thanks, Hazel. That's been a real privilege. Thank you. I've loved that.
Yeah. So I think it's so valuable for people, So thank you very much for taking the time. It's much appreciated. Hey there, it's Jake here. Listen, I want to say a massive thank you to all of our new subscribers. But most people that watch this content on YouTube don't subscribe. I want to change that. The more subscribers, then the more amazing we can make high performance. And I've had a lovely message actually from Rob, who says, I only recently discovered the High Performance channel and I watched the full Eddie Howe and Tyson Fury interviews, both some of the best content I've seen in the last 5 years on YouTube. Listen, if you agree and you want to keep this amazing stuff coming for free, then hit subscribe right now. Thank you so much.